In this session, we're going to be talking about Ebola virus disease, what it is, where it is, how it's spread, and what to do about it. We're also going to take a moment to explore some thoughts and concerns regarding how Ebola could possibly affect Saudi Arabia during the 2014 Hajj pilgrimage. My name is Mr. Jeffrey Horning, and for those of you who don't know me, I have a background as a hospital and pre-hospital critical care paramedic, as well as with the U.S. Department of Defense in the medical treatment of chemical casualties. And I'm a hazardous materials technician certified at the incident commander level. I'm also a second-year Master of Public Health candidate at the George Washington University in Washington, D.C. I'm presenting this slide set for Al God College, and we hope that you enjoy it. So normally this slide goes second to last, but I wanted you to see exactly where the information I'm going to be giving you is coming from. All the numbers that I'm going to be giving you are coming from these three sources. And in fact, the numbers themselves are only coming from the first two, the World Health Organization and the U.S. Centers for Disease Control. I feel that this is very important because with this latest 2014 Ebola outbreak, there's a lot of misinformation out there, and that could be for a number of reasons, but there's definitely a lot of fear and a lot of panic. And social media being what it is, people are able to blog and write their opinions, and sometimes they write their opinions as if they were facts. But there's a lot of bad information out there that really isn't even close to accurate. Some of it is just an out and out lie. But it's online, and your students may have seen it, you may have seen it, and I just wanted you to know that all the information I'm giving you today came from these three very legitimate sources. If there is anything that is my own opinion, I will preface that statement with, in my opinion. So our objectives for today. Upon completion of the lesson, we want you to be able to articulate and define what is Ebola, to know the signs and symptoms of Ebola, to know the isolation and treatment protocols for Ebola, and be able to advise friends, family, coworkers, and students on the nature of Ebola. We really want you to be able to sort fact from fiction regarding Ebola and know where to get additional information regarding Ebola virus disease. So the official name is Ebola virus disease. It was changed from Ebola hemorrhagic fever, as it was originally called. It first appeared in our world in 1976 in two places simultaneously. What was then North Zaire, now the Democratic Republic of Congo, and another remote area of the Sudan. It has a historical case fatality rate of between 25% and 90%. The latest 2014 outbreak is approximately at 55% at the time of this recording. Ebola virus disease is classified as a filovirus, one of the two identified, the other being Marburg virus that was identified in 1967. The action is that it causes hemorrhagic fever in humans and in animals. No definitive cure or vaccine yet exists. The care is going to be intensive supportive care. Now, that misinformation we spoke about a little bit ago, this is one place you'll see it. Cases to date, 1,251 confirmed cases. The number that you'll see in the New York Times and in most other news sources is 1,975 cases. Well, 1,975 combined cases. That includes confirmed, probable, and suspected. So deaths to date. Since March of 2014, 686 confirmed deaths from Ebola virus disease. 1,069 combined deaths. And again, that is the number that you will normally see is the higher number. Symptoms of Ebola can typically include fever, of course. It is originally called Ebola hemorrhagic fever, but that fever would be greater than 38.6 or 101.5 degrees Fahrenheit. Severe headache, muscle pain, weakness, diarrhea, vomiting, abdominal pain, and lack of appetite. Some patients may also experience rash, red eyes, hiccups, cough, sore throat, chest pain, difficulty breathing, difficulty swallowing, and unexplained bleeding inside and outside of the body. Now I'd like you to take 30 seconds here and slowly read through the list that I just read you. And when you're done, I'll go into a little bit more detail. Okay, have you had time to do it? So, while you were reading the list, did these remind you of anything? I certainly hope so. And maybe now you're starting to see why Ebola makes so many people so nervous. Imagine if I told you that the weakness you're feeling and the headache you have might just be dehydration. But because of where you've been, it might also be Ebola. This is where a very sound and solid history and physical come into play. Who is your patient? Has he or she had any contact with the infected? Have they been in an infected country or an infection zone? What does he or she do for a living? These are going to be your key clinical indicators. Now, there's a lot of information on this slide, and I'm going to give you the important stuff. The CDC case definition for a person under investigation is a person who has both consistent symptoms and risk factors that we've discussed. And they have to have epidemiological risk factors within the past 21 days, such as contact with the blood or the body fluids of humans who were infected, or human remains who were infected, people known or suspected to have been infected with Ebola virus disease. This is how you become a person under investigation. And these case definitions are extremely important when it comes to identifying Ebola virus disease. So let's do a case ourselves. Your patient is a 29-year-old man complaining of fever, nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea for the past 3 days. Remember, those are all signs and symptoms of Ebola. He is weak, pale, and has no appetite. He lives at home with his wife and son. He works in an office building in the finance department in Riyadh. He has no medical training, and he hasn't been in contact with any persons or been to any areas that are known Ebola zones. His son was sick 2 weeks ago, but his son has since recovered and feels better. Would you think that this man possibly has Ebola? I hope your answer was a solid no, but feel free to discuss with your colleagues. So the development of Ebola requires 2 to 21 days of an incubation period. Usually there's an average of 8 days where people will have developed symptoms by. But if a person has not developed signs and symptoms within 21 days, they will not develop the disease. So let's take a look at case number 2. A 22-year-old male comes to you. His chief complaint is fever and diarrhea for 3 days with severe stomach cramping. He is weak, pale, and has no appetite. These are all signs and symptoms of Ebola. When you delve a little deeper into his history, you find out that he lives at home with his mother and father. He attends university here in Riyadh. He has no medical training, but he's just recently, 1 week ago, returned from Nigeria, where he was participating in a summer project with his university, building roads in rural areas. What do you think? Does this patient warrant further investigation and laboratory analysis? I hope you said yes, because it would be irresponsible not to isolate and do some laboratory analysis on this patient. Once again, back to the misinformation. A lot of people will tell you that Ebola has spread to both Europe and North America. Neither of those statements is true. There have been patients who were medically transferred to Spain and to the United States, but no accidental exposure of Ebola has been transmitted to anywhere but the African continent, West Africa and Nigeria. So there are no cases right now in Europe, Asia, Australia, North or South America, and of course not Antarctica. So the World Health Organization is currently urging for no travel restrictions to be put into place. They feel that the likelihood of an infected person getting on an airplane and traveling to another continent, unknowingly spreading Ebola, is low enough to not disrupt the global transportation network. Ebola is spread through close contact with infected body fluids. We need to make that very, very clear. Ebola is not airborne. Droplet precautions should be taken, but Ebola is not airborne. But any close contact with the infected body fluids of living or dead suspected Ebola cases is how Ebola is spread, or positive Ebola cases is how that is spread. So any of the infected body fluids, remember, body fluids are of course going to be semen, saliva, blood, vaginal fluids, anything wet, wet, sticky, or we used to say if it's wet, sticky, or gooey and it's not yours, don't touch it. And that really applies here with Ebola. Body fluids are how Ebola is spread. Ebola is not airborne. Now, we do suspect that burial rituals, the washing and cleansing of a body, preparing it for the funeral, is a major is a major cause of the spread of Ebola, especially in the early stages of an outbreak. But it's important to remember that Ebola is not airborne, and that it was originally a zoonotic disease. It's believed to have the natural reservoir of a type of fruit bat. And we believe, most experts believe, that humans contract the disease by coming in contact with the infected blood of an animal, not the infected meat of an animal. So it would be during the slaughtering or preparation phase that someone came in contact with that blood, not during the eating phase. So just a real quick summary. This is an infographic from the CDC that you can click, or you can right-click and take and print out, post on your wall, post in your classroom, hand out to your students. You cannot get Ebola through the air. You cannot get Ebola through water. And you can't get Ebola through food. Now, one thing that you should know, and this is where I see a lot of misinformation on the internet as well, is that Ebola isn't airborne, but you do need droplet precautions. So if a person is coughing or sneezing and they were to cough or sneeze directly onto you or into your face or anywhere near mucous membranes that could absorb it, then yes, that would cause transmission. But you cannot be in the same room 10 feet away from someone and contract their Ebola. Also, you can't get Ebola through water, but I would imagine that saliva on a glass is a possible way to spread Ebola. So it would be important to just use regular, normal home hygiene and sterilization of anything that people use to put anywhere near their mouth, which would of course already be being done in hospitals. So the treatment for Ebola. Well, Ebola currently has no known effective treatment, and treatment focuses on supportive care. According to the CDC, this care should focus on balancing the patient's fluids and electrolytes, maintaining their oxygen status and their blood pressure, as well as all other vital signs, and treating them for any complicating infections. There are treatments, I believe there's 2 at the current time, that are currently in development, but they haven't even reached phase 1 human trials yet. You will see also on the internet, wonderful thing that it is, you will see petitions coming around for the FDA and other organizations that test medications to please just skip the testing and put it into production immediately, or fast track the testing and put it into production immediately. And this is an indication of how scared people are of Ebola, and if a case did jump to another continent, how scared they would be. Now, it's important to remember that here in Saudi Arabia, we're pretty darn close to the African continent. So if it was going to jump from Africa to anywhere, we are definitely a potential area where that could happen. Okay, so here are some additional resources for you. The first one is a manual produced by the CDC for healthcare workers in the African setting. This is a 50-odd page manual that will tell you everything you need to know about isolation and how to set up temporary isolation in rural areas and how to quarantine people and how to protect yourself. The second CDC link is a free downloadable and printable PPE poster reminding people how to don and off their PPE properly. It's always important to remind students of this and remind your fellow instructors and coworkers as well. The third link there is the World Health Organization. Everything I brought you in this presentation came from either there or the U.S. Centers for Disease Control right below it. Medicine Sans Frontiers, also known as Doctors Without Borders in the United States, provided some additional resources. So our final thoughts for this presentation, and we do appreciate you watching, is that we want you to be knowledgeable, prepared, and to have a very healthy fear of Ebola, but we don't want you panicked. Panic only leads to waste and unnecessary death. If you've been watching the news, you've seen protests and vandalism of Ebola centers in Liberia, and communities who've banded together and said they'll burn it down and they'll kill everybody there and they'll do this and they'll do that. The reason for this is that people are panicked and they don't necessarily understand what Ebola is. Just today I did some extra research before I recorded this, and I saw a website claiming that Ebola is a government plot to take over the world and kill all the people they don't like. And so there's some people out there that have some really, really bad information, and we don't want them panicked. We want you to be afraid of Ebola. We want you to understand how serious it is, but not to be panicked by it. So if you vigilantly follow your PPE guidelines and strict isolation procedures for suspected cases, it will protect you and the population that you serve. And so I have one final question for you. If Ebola virus disease was able to spread to Saudi Arabia during the 2014 Hajj pilgrimage, what would its likely effects be? Do they possibly share cups or bottles during the Hajj? Are people in close contact with each other during the Hajj? What would be the best way, in your opinion, to prepare for such a scenario? All right, and I told you that that was the last question, but I actually have 4 more questions for you. So I'd like you to name 5 signs or symptoms of Ebola virus disease. Can you do it? Hopefully. Next question. Can you get Ebola if you are simply breathing the same air as someone with Ebola? Third question. If a person was in an Ebola zone but left 30 days ago and has been symptom-free, can they still contract the disease from that exposure? And the last question, if you were in charge of preparedness at a medical site here in the kingdom, how would you educate, train, and prepare your staff regarding Ebola? Keep in mind, Ebola has not reached Saudi Arabia or any of the GCC countries yet. Should you prepare now or should you wait? How long do you think it's going to be before this Ebola outbreak burns out? All right, thank you very much. As I said, my name is Jeffrey Horning for Al Gaid College. We really appreciate you listening today, and we hope that we've taught you something. If you have any questions, feel free to email us here in Riyadh. Thank you very much. Goodbye.